Hate crimes based on race and religion have been increasing in many places, even outside the United States. That's the context for a new report on Islamophobic abuse in Massachusetts by CARE, which stands for the Council on American-Islamic Relations. We'd like to welcome its Civil Rights Director, Barbara Dougan. Thank you very much for being with us, Barbara.
My pleasure.
This new report looks at what happened in 2018, and when we say civil rights abuses, what kind of things does this mean?
And this is 2018 in Massachusetts only.
Right.
It means everything ranging from the most egregious forms of discrimination, which are hate crimes and harassment, to discrimination in the workplace, on the public streets, in housing developments, and also the federal policies that result in very abusive treatment of Muslims in their daily lives.
Well, it's certainly one I know that you're familiar with is what happens when people are traveling, especially at the airport. Are we talking about a few unusual cases? Are we talking about something that's pretty common?
Well, you and I had a good conversation about this once before, about an individual case, but thank you for raising that, because from the federal level, Muslims are overwhelmingly make up what's called the Watchlist. And there's actually, it's not just one list, it's a couple different ones. And this is a secret list. No one knows how many people are on it. You don't know how you get on it, and there's no way to get out of it. You know when you're on a watch list, it's like a disease. You start looking at all the different symptoms, and then you realize, by golly, I must be on some sort of watch list. This is maintained by the federal government. It's being challenged on a number of fronts in court, but it can have profound consequences. When you and I talked, before we talked about just dreadful treatment at the airport as someone was going through security. So you get that, you get travel delays, you get sometimes a question for 2 to 4 hours when you're trying to leave the country or coming back into the country at the airport or crossing the border. But one of the things that we've learned through litigation is the watch list, even though you can't find out if you're on it, is disseminated to over 1,400 entities around the country and in other countries. So 1,400 entities have information saying that you are a known or suspected terrorist, even though the vast majority of people on the list have done absolutely nothing where they've been charged with any offense. They range from babies to people whose names might be similar to somebody else's. We're not exactly sure, again, how you get on the list because it's all secret. And I would suggest that that's about as un-American as you can get, to have a secret list that the government compiles and is used against you, but you have no way of knowing if you're on or off it or how to challenge it.
One place where there might be a lot of stress on Muslims is in schools. And I know we have a lot of diversity, a lot of immigrants in public schools in the state, but if you have somebody from a certain part of the world where it's normal to wear a hijab, I guess they're sort of exposed, aren't they?
Yeah, and it is girls and women who really bear the brunt of the more aggressive physical harassment and assaults. We do see cases of bullying in the public schools, and those are tough because you can't be with a student all the time. So you ask the schools to make sure there's a safety plan in place. You ask them to also just be aware that this is going on. And I mean, we're talking about a place of education. We should be educating our children that this is not acceptable, but also why, the fact that we are a diverse community with people who look differently, practice different religions, believe differently.
Well, I know that there's another dimension to this when you get beyond, real world, real time, interpersonal context, and that's where you get to social media. What about the role of social media as an enabler at this point?
It's huge. I mean, I say that being the worst social media person there is, but that drives so much. I mean, one of the examples we gave in the report was something that started in England or the United UK, about Punish a Muslim Day, and that was all social media driven. And of course, it made it to the U.S., as all these things do, and it manifested in the Boston schools with a young girl, I think middle schooler, being warned that someone was going to try to make points off her because there were different level of points you assigned yourself based on the level of violence. And in fact, this child was assaulted in her school.
Chris, the other thing is about the climate in a given part of the world here. I don't think our president has ever explicitly said go out and attack a certain group of people or people in a certain religious group. But on the other hand, is there a tone, is there a climate that feeds a lot of this?
Well, yes. You know, after I was doing this kind of work after 9/11, and at least then President Bush made the call for national unity. I can't say it always worked. I still had a lot of clients, but there was that message coming from, from top on down. Now it is our, federal government's position that Muslims should be surveilled, should be demonized in language. We had the Muslim ban case fought for 2 years. So of course that sort of national messaging, trickles down, if you will, into what plays out on the streets and in the classroom. I mean, people, it's a term that's probably overused, but emboldened certainly describes, I think, some of the behavior that we're seeing described in this report, especially where it's aggressive or violent encounters.
Well, in recent years, there have been acts of terrorism by Muslims, but on the other hand, looking at this country, extremist terrorism, who's doing it now?
Well, I'm no expert on extremism. I take care of my community, but clearly there's been many terrible attacks by people who we're not sure what drives them whatsoever. I mean, violence and extremism cross all lines, all races, all religions. My expertise is on what's happening in Massachusetts, but other groups have issued their reports. I mean, the rise of anti-Semitism is just, pretty terrifying that's going on too. So we're seeing a lot of that being generated from whatever you want to call them, the alt-right, neo-Nazis. There's other terms we could use, but we're seeing that. I mean, to me, Charlottesville was a huge wake-up call. I never thought in my lifetime that I would see young white men marching, chanting, "Jews will not replace us." I mean, I was just stunned. On the other hand, it's probably not that surprising, especially when we did not get the kind of response from Washington that unequivocally rejected that sort of behavior.
What about ways to push in the opposite direction? I mean, after the shootings in New Zealand, just a few days, maybe practically the same day, the governor and the mayor going to a mosque in Roxbury. Is that just a photo op, or is there something more to that? When
I hope there is. I mean, I think every kind of interfaith effort, regardless of which community is offering its support or which community needs it at that moment, is incredibly important. We got wonderful messages of support, as did many mosques after New Zealand. And the same token, I know that we reached out and offered our sympathy to the cemetery the Jewish cemetery in Fall River that was desecrated. Every time people link arms, figuratively or literally, I think it's important because it sends that message that we're all in this together, and especially when government leaders do it. I don't care if it's a photo op, it's a good one. It shows that the leadership takes this seriously and does not agree with that kind of behavior.
I want to ask you one other climate issue here. If people feel that they're victimized by bullying or something worse than that, are they afraid of coming forward still, you think?
Oh, yes. My feeling is, both from having done this work, in another context and doing it now, is that what we see is the tip of the iceberg. It's people who have both the willingness and the information about who to come forward to. I think many people are afraid to report harassment, things that would be criminal in nature. I mean, there's all sorts of abuses that aren't necessarily criminal. I think there's a great fear to come forward. It's often assumed that that's based on someone's immigration status, or more specifically that they're not in status or are undocumented. But that's not what we find. That's not true. I mean, it's based on a lot of different things. Some people have gotten the message that you need to lay low in your new country. You need to just not draw attention to yourself. Other people come to countries where law enforcement serves a very different role, so they're not sure how to interface with it here. And other people are simply afraid that it's going to make a bad situation worse. So yes, I think it's very true that people are afraid to come forward. I think there's a lot of reasons for that too, though.
Finally, Barbara, I know people can get this report online somewhere, but is there a way they can check that out and maybe call your organization if they need some help?
If people have questions or concerns, they can call CARE Massachusetts. Our main number is 617-862-9159. And then they can go to our website, which is www.carema.org.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Barbara Dougan from CARE Massachusetts.